As many other Vietnam veterans, he started to abuse alcohol, and his family became very, very close to suicide. In a moment of grace, as he calls it, he did not jump into suicide, but instead of that, he underwent psychotherapy. He also got together with other Vietnam veterans for sweat lodges and sharing their stories. He became a probation officer and a counselor, and he helped many other war veterans to cope with their trauma and survive, actually not commit suicide. And he is invited at the local high schools, where he tells his stories. And I could witness that several times, and it was just amazing what happened there. To see these young kids watching with awe this huge man, I mean, he's that big. Certainly not a wimp, not a coward, not a weakling, but yet to watch this man express his shame and regret, go through his guilt, do something with his shame, and he certainly is role modeling a kind of masculinity which is beyond emotional freezing, beyond violence, abuse, etc. Another example, and I close with that. A while ago, I was one of the facilitators of a 7-day seminar with participants from Germany, Israel, and Palestine. Actually, there were Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis. During the first few days, participants from these three groups, you can imagine that's quite an interesting combination. Participants from these three groups were making efforts to get into a dialogue, but were sort of stuck in the opinions they had brought along, and also the atmosphere in the group was charged with latent animosities. You could just see the three groups sitting there. That changed dramatically once I made shame a topic. On this day, there surfaced an overwhelming, you could still feel it, an overwhelming amount of shame, as the Germans, for example, shared their stories about the shame to be a German, as the Jewish Israelis shared their shame stories, shame about other different kind of shame, and the Palestinian Israelis shared their shame stories. This day ended with a profound emotional connection between all of us. We found one common ground, because shame is something we all know. Shame is universal. Thank you.
I was wondering if you talked a lot about the shame, and in the Nazi handbook, you said. Do you think the Nazi leaders were aware of the power of shame?
I don't think so.
Okay, I was wondering if maybe you thought of it maybe being a form of control.
It is a form of control, definitely.
I was wondering if you thought maybe the Nazi leaders be a form of control for the people, for the masses.
The experience that it is, actually. The research on shame started just a few years ago, a few decades ago. It's just amazing how late it came, even though it is so profound, so widespread, etc. But what happened is Hitler and the other Nazi leaders, I mean, they started in the 1920s. They went to towns, city halls, and just making speeches. And by try and error, they found out that's the way people react strongly. I compare this with a joke. This way to tell a joke, or that joke, is very sort of powerful. So by trying to error, they found this is a way to get to people. I don't think they did it consciously.
And in regards to the 21st century as of now, and regarding Palestine, Israel, nations such as Iran, Iraq, things like that, could nations, or do you see these nations eventually coming to terms with their shame, for us all to come together as one to a common goal and agreement?
that is, in my opinion, that's the way to achieve peace. But as long as we are stuck in the shame and do not deal with it in conscious and constructive ways, it seems to be much easier to blame others, to beat on others, to be violent to others instead of accepting our own.
When having groups such as you did with Israelis, Palestinians, did you see as having normal individuals in society come together with disagreements, speaking more on one-on-one terms instead of a national perspective? Does that make it easier for individuals to understand?
Certainly. I thought, may I give you another example? Sort of a vision. Let's take one aspect of the so-called clash of civilizations. Let's take US-Iran relations. I don't think many US citizens are aware of what their country, the US, had done to the Iranian people. So what if the US government would really make public what the US has done to the Iranian people, namely the overthrow of the democratically elected President Mossadegh in 1953 with the CIA installing the dictator Shah Pahlavi. What if the US people, it's just a vision, but let's think big for a moment, would really accept their shame, what they have done, the suffering they brought over the Iranian people, would accept the shame, go through it, and accept the guilt. And let's imagine a meeting of governmental officials, starting with the president, admitting his shame, guilt, and regret to the Iranian people, asking for forgiveness, offering amends. Wouldn't that be an interesting start for a dialogue, different from what we have today?
I was wondering if, when you were interviewing the elderly Nazis, and since you've interviewed the elderly Nazis, knowing that many of them are getting more elderly, and the original ones you interviewed perhaps died, and there are others like them who are closer to death in nursing homes all around Germany. Do you feel, and do you and your colleagues feel some sense of urgency about facilitating a process whereby many of these older adults can start to tell their stories, difficult though they are for you and the rest of the society to hear?
Yes, definitely. But there's still 10 or more million people living, senior citizens living, who had been conscious or not, early or later, at youth or adults, have been living through these years. And I think that could be an incredible healing process for the whole society, not just for those 10 million, but also has of course an effect, because they are citizens, they are voters, they are participants of our society. Huge tasks, yes.